Right, so we've had a 2-week break, and as we're coming back, we're heading into exams, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to take a step back and just think a little bit about scenarios. So the reason we've had a break is that we've had protests and the universities have been shut down. And this leaves us in a very uncertain predicament where we're absolutely not sure what's going to happen on the 3rd of October, tomorrow. There's a big question mark. Will university open? Will there be violence? Will we write exams? Will the year finish? Will we get our degrees? There's 100 questions that we have at this stage. So what we want to do is we want to use scenarios. So we know that the first step in the scenarios is that we want to look at the focal question. And we could use a focal question such as, what will UCT look like in now what period? So it's a very volatile situation. So actually, if we had a view of even the next year or 14 or 15 months or 18 months maximum, that would probably give us a pretty good view. So if we say will look like in January 2018, so we're sitting right now over here, we're in September, or actually October 2016, right? And if we move forward through the whole of next year, which is 2017, and we get to 2018 in January, all right, that'll give us a pretty good view, and we'll probably be able to resolve a lot of what might happen if we're able to answer that question. So what will UCT look like in January 2018? All right, but then when we think about it, UCT is a little bit limited, right? Because UCT is very much focused just on UCT, but UCT is in a much bigger system. And again, if we just pull this out, it's a little bit like this. We've got protesters. Okay, where's my hand? There we go. We've got protesters. And then we've got the government over here. And in the middle, we've got UCT and the other campuses, WITS, UJ, Rhodes, etc. So all the universities are sitting in the middle. But from a systemic point of view, we have to think about the whole system, right? We can't just think about UCT, because UCT is going to be played on by this broader system that's playing out. So we want to look at not just UCT, so we're going to expand that a little bit. And instead of saying what will UCT look like, so we'll say what will SA higher education look like in January 2018. All right, so we've got a good focal question. For a good focal question, we've got a fixed date. Remember the two parts of it, and it's an open question. We don't know, there's not one answer to this, there's many different answers, and that's how we're going to answer it. We're going to answer it with our scenarios. All right, so then let's move across and we say, so what would be the influences? Let's have a look here. And you already, I'm sure, would be thinking about some of these influences, but let's try and capture what I think are the big ones. So firstly would be government leadership. So we could say it's probably been a little bit lacking at this stage, and it could be improved and all those things. But the question really that we're interested in is what would it look like between now and January 2018, because that's what our focal question says. All right. So government leadership is the first one. And then university leadership, and that's really, it always gets labeled on the VC, and in UCT's case, max price. But the question will be, well, how will universities lead? They're going to be really tested. And the challenge for universities, obviously, is the people who are leading them are generally hired for their academic abilities, and they're being tested in how well they manage crises. All right. So those are two big influences. The other influence I think is important is the alignment between the protesters and the university. Because at this stage, there isn't much alignment. From this picture here I drew, we've kind of got a system which is between protesters with an issue with government, who are really the main funders of education, and caught in the middle of the universities, but they are the targets of all the protest at this stage. So we're interested in the alignment between the protesters and the university, because if there's strong alignment, it would be different to if there's no alignment. And right now we could probably say there's very low alignment. Okay, so that's that alignment. The level of violence and that can be violence from the protesters, it can be violence from the police, it can be violence instigated by private security firms. The level of violence is going to play a key role. All right. What else have I got here? Let's just have a think about it. Nature of the protesters' demands, all right, is very important, because what we've seen with this is that these protests have led from, and again we could probably draw a little diagram here, from March 2015, which started with Roads Must Fall, and then we fast forward to August, September, about a year ago, 2015, with Fees Must Fall. In February, March of 2016, there was 2016. There was UCT protests, certainly, and there's a whole incident around Shackville, which has been labelled Shackville TRC, which came out of very violent protests at the beginning of 2016, and then fast forward now to August, September 2016, and these demands which are now back to fees, but also about students interdicted in this process here. So what's happened is, where it started with roads and decolonization of universities, to fees, to Shackville, which ended up with people being interdicted at UCT, and which then started protests in September, which has now led back to fees. But there's also, underlying all of this is outsourcing at the universities. So there's a mix of different demands which have come from the protesters over the time, and there's more. And so the influence, I think, is interesting here, is to say, what's the nature of the protesters' demands? Like, how are they focused, or are they ever increasing? Is it possible to solve them in some way? Could we actually get to what would resolution look like? That would be one of the big influences. All right. Completion of 2016 academic year is a big influence, because that will have implications. If it does or doesn't, completion of 2016 academic year. There are some implications there, and again, we're avoiding the political view on this. We're not really interested in what's good or bad, what's right or wrong. We're interested in looking at what the possible influence is, and then mapping that and understanding how that influences our scenarios. And then obviously university funding, which is one of the core issues. Here we need to include that, university funding, which obviously ties to government leadership in some way. And I think that's all the ones that I've never looked. Okay, that's right, completion, okay. Bonds. Okay, so we've got some influences there, which gives us something to work from. We're looking at impact and probability of each. Remember, the impact is the impact that this influence will have on the focal question, all right? And the probability is the probability that this influence will change over the period of the scenarios, which is until January 2018, okay? So the impact is the impact of the influence on the question, and the probability is the probability of this influence changing over the next period. So let's have a look. Government leadership, we said the impact is high. It's 5. The probability of it changing, I can't see why right now this would be something that's going to change significantly. We're not about to change governments. We're not about to change ministers. There's no major reason why we think it will change. University leadership, impact high, but not as high as the government leadership, because of this picture here. The university is caught in the middle, all right? So the university leadership is high. The probability of it changing also a bit higher than the government, because it's a bit more fluid. These are public institutions, but they're led by individuals who probably have more leeway than government to change. However, they're not the vastest changing organizations in the world, universities. Alignment between protesters and the university, well, 5, it has a huge impact, because if this is aligned, it would be quite a major force if there was strong alignment. But the probability of this changing, well, average, 3, we thought. Level of violence impact is 4. It's fairly high, medium high. And the probability right now is also 3. This could even be 4, but we'll leave it at 3. It's probably about 3. The nature of the protesters' demands is 4. It has a huge impact. All right, what are the demands? This will either settle or not. If we can get to the bottom of the demands and actually resolve the demands. And the probability of it changing, well, based on what's happened so far, looking at how this movement has progressed over the time, well, we'd say that's quite high in terms of probability that it's going to change. All right. Completion of the 2016 academic year, well, in the bigger scheme of things, although individual students who are trying to finish would think this is the highest, if we're looking at this strategically over the period of our focal question, then probably it's about a 2, because we could maybe not complete the academic year and still recover next year if some of the other things start falling into place. And then 4, in terms of the probability, well, right now this looks very volatile, lots of change potentially here. We really don't know. This is one of our big unknowns. All right. And then university funding, which is linked very much here back up to government leadership. But the university funding, we said 5, because it has a huge impact. That's really the core issue. Fees must fall. That's really the core issue. Probability of it changing in the next short while, having, there's a ministerial committee or whatever they call these things, that commission of inquiry. But at this stage, that commission of inquiry is only going to report and start reporting and giving feedback in June 2017. So very low probability that something's going to change in funding as it currently stands if we relate it back to this key question. So if these are our influences, we can look at them and we can say that probably these two, 5, 3, which gives us 15, we multiply them out, and the nature of the protest is this gives us 16. It's 12, 3, 2, 6, 5, 1's 5, 2, 4's 8, 5, 2's 10. So these two, through this process that I've gone through, end up to be our largest influences, and we'll use those now to map onto our scenario canvas. So alignment between protests and the university and the nature of the protesters' demands are our 2 big influences. This is subjective, of course. I've decided impact probability. We could argue it different ways, but this is what I've decided are our biggest influences, and we can now actually go ahead and build the scenarios.